Okay, bore da pawb, good morning, or good afternoon, pronounced da now. Sorry, we've moved on so quickly. Just quick introductions. My name's Debbie Maule. I'm the Children's Partnership Coordinator in the Vale of Glamorgan Council. I'm responsible for childcare in early years initiatives, so they include things like the childcare offer, grants, training, workforce, that type of thing. As part of my role, I also attend the Early Years Forum, which Katie is also a part of, and she'll go into more detail during the presentation. And we get the referrals into this forum, and I have a budget that will support children with additional learning needs if that's what's been identified. So just like to introduce my colleague Katie.
Yeah, I'm that person that's on mute.
Yes.
So I'm Katie Barret and I'm the Transition Officer in the Vale of Glamorgan. I'm currently seconded over from Cardiff and I work alongside Kirsty Gamlin, who is the Early Years Officer, and we both, our roles are to oversee transition for children with additional needs into settings and schools.
So we've got about 19 minutes left, so won't keep you too long now. Just if you've got any questions or anything, please put them in the chat bar and I'll have a look at those as we go through. If you've got any questions as well, raise your hand, and Katie is a Welsh speaker, so if you want to ask the question in Welsh, and she will give the answer in English. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Can we go straight on to the next slide, please, Louise? So, as you probably know, there are currently changes in the way that children's additional learning needs are identified, assessed and met in Wales. And this is due to the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal Act, which is more commonly referred to as the ALNET Act. The ALNET Act is part of the ALN Transformation Programme, and it plans to focus on inclusion, putting children and young people at the centre and ensuring that they are supported to reach their full potential. The three overarching objectives of the ALNET Act are to provide a unified legislation framework to support children and young people aged 0 to 25 years with additional learning needs. Now, this is something which has changed to the previous system, and this is the biggest thing that will affect us in the early years, is that the previous system with statementing was from statutory school age upwards. And I think it was about between 19, whereas now it goes from birth. So it does change a lot of how we identify children with additional learning needs in the early years. It's also to promote an integrated, collaborative process of assessment, planning and monitoring, which facilitates early, timely and effective interventions. And then finally, to have a fair and transparent system for providing information and advice for resolving concerns and appeals. Importantly as well, it's important to note that this was approved by the Senedd in March last year, March 21, so came into force in September 21, and therefore any new children who are identified now come under the new system. So that's all the children that we'll be working with in the early years will come into the new ALNET system rather than the old statementing system. So can you move on to the next one, please? So what is meant by early years? Under the ALNET Act, children who are, now this is quite a mouthful, so children who are under compulsory school age, who are not attending a maintained school. So that would be any children under reception class age, so under 5, who attend childminders, day nurseries or play groups that are non-maintained. The local authority will always be responsible for identifying additional learning needs within those children and to meet their needs. So it will never be on the setting or the childminder to do that. For the children who are also under compulsory school age, but who are attending a maintained school, so that could be a maintained school nursery, they will have their needs identified and met by the school. So if you've got a child who is with you in a setting or a childminder, but they're also attending a school nursery and you're providing the wraparound, it will be over to the school to do that. So there is no responsibility on the setting or childminder to put any of this in place, only that you will attend meetings and input into it. So can we move on to the next one again, please? So then what do we mean by ALN? Within the code, the ALN is identified as, or is defined as, having a learning difficulty or disability which calls for additional learning provision, to have a significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others the same age, or a disability which prevents or hinders the child from making use of the facilities for education generally provided for others of the same age in a mainstream maintained school. Now, for our early years children, when you consider those three points there, it's for us to establish what that child may need when they get to 5. So for children under compulsory school age, a learning difficulty would have a learning difficulty or disability if he or she is, or would be, if no additional provision were made, likely to be when of compulsory school age. So that need when they're 2, when they're very young, when they come into us, can be very difficult. It's often, more often than not, very difficult to know what that is going to, how that is going to change by the time they get to 5, which is why it makes it so complicated and it's such a rigorous process to get those additional learning needs identified when they're that young. So it's our job to look into the future really and say, okay, if nothing was done with this child, how would they be when they're 5? Okay, can we move on, please? Brill. So this is the model of inclusive provision. So some of you might have seen in the past, there used to be a triangle, like a pyramid model, that had the intensive, the complex children at the top, and they were the ones that required the statement of special educational needs. I should say as well, additional learning needs replaces the old special educational needs. So in those days, it was statements of special educational needs at the top, and then it filtered down then to the universal at the bottom. So this also reflects that graduated response, but what this shows is that it's a much more flexible approach. So you've got the wiper there, which represents how children's needs can change, like I said, from when they're really young, right up until they're 25. Their needs will change as they grow and as they develop. And that wiper can go back and forth. For the most part, as you can see here, most children, the majority of children, will fall under the universal and targeted categories. It will only be a very, very small percentage of children that require that intensive provision in the form of a local authority IDP that requires additional learning provision. So ALP is what you might hear it referred as, and that refers to when the needs cannot be met within that school or that setting, and they need to bring in some additional learning provision. Most commonly, that is in the early years, that is in the form of an additional support worker. For all other children, their needs can be met within the universal and targeted sections, and that means that their needs can be met within the setting through enhanced provision and through working with other professionals related to the child to meet their needs either on a small group basis or as individuals. The amount of input required will change from setting to setting and area to area. So it can be very county focused, or literally setting to setting. So for settings that have got 8 children and 3 members of staff, they're already able to provide that enhanced provision just because of the ratios. For settings that have got 25 children, might be a little bit more tricky, and they might bring in speech and language therapy or portage or somebody to just advise them on how to meet those needs. So can we move on again, please? So as I was saying, things change from area to area. So this is just an example of how we've supported, or we do support, settings and childminders in Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. This document is the Inclusion for All Good Practice Guide, which we've developed with a range of professionals from health, education, social care, third sector, and also with parent input as well. It's based on 4 training modules that we run, which is all around inclusion for all, and all reflect the new ALNET Act. It provides practical strategies, ideas and approaches for the inclusion of all children with a focus on early years settings and childminders. I am going to make a copy of this available to the organisers today. So I was hoping to put a link in the chat, but I can't find it quickly. So I will make a copy of this available, and hopefully they'll be able to distribute it to anybody who's interested, but I will sort that out afterwards. So as well as this, in meeting those children who are in the universal and targeted sections, we work together with settings, with health agencies and other specialist teams within education. So things like visual impairment team and hearing impairment team, to support the needs of those children who don't need that, who haven't got that additional learning needs, requiring additional learning provision, but do require a little bit extra. So we also work with those as well. But like I was saying, that's going to be different in your different counties, and you know how that setup is. So we can only comment on what we do. So can we move on again, please? So, as I've already mentioned, the local authority is responsible for all children with ALN under compulsory school age and not attending a maintained school. And this is across Wales. So this is for the most part, well, not for the most part, this is across Wales. It's just details might change from county to county. So if it's brought to the local authority's attention that a child may have an additional learning need, the local authority must decide that this is the case. The child only has an additional learning need if a learning difficulty or disability calls for additional learning provision. And this is where it's important to differentiate additional learning need to additional need. So you can have many children, we come across many children that have got an identified additional need, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is a barrier to their learning. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got an additional learning need that requires that additional learning provision. So it's those children that are in that small red section, that small little intensive section. And it's up for the local authority to identify that. And also it's up to the local authority to identify if an IDP is required. Now, an IDP is an individual development plan, which is what has replaced statements. So where you hear the word statements is now what we call individual development plan, which is much more child focused, which I'll come on to in a second. The local authority must prepare and maintain that IDP and must secure the additional learning provision. So again, that's not up to settings to do or childminders, that is up to the local authority or the school. Can we move on again, please? So within the code, it states that the local authority's functions include deciding whether the children have ALN, preparing and maintaining the maintenance of the IDP, and the provision of information about the IDP, to review and revise the IDP, to review the additional learning provision arrangements, and to make sure that the arrangements, to make arrangements to provide advice and information. This long acronym here, sorry, there's so many acronyms, is the Early Years Additional Learning Needs Lead Officer, which every county has got, and it's ultimately their responsibility to ensure that the local authority adheres to these functions. So they have got the overview of all of those IDPs. Can we move on again, please? So like I was saying, the IDP, the Individual Development Plan, is much more person-centred than statements used to be. And that's one of their big strengths, really. It's a big strength of the new system. So as part of achieving the aims of the Act, there's that strong emphasis on children and young people at the centre, ensuring that they're supported to reach their full potential, and that it brings into the ethos of person-centred practice. And this quote, I think, sums that up. So it's a continual process of listening and learning about what is important to and for the person now and in the future, with family, friends and professionals working together to make this happen. There's another quote that I found, which I think really sums it up too, and this is from Helen Sanderson Associates. It's that person-centred practice is not something that happens once. Everyone keeps listening, learning, and making things happen. Putting the plan into action helps the person to achieve what they want out of life. Plans can be changed as your needs and wishes change. And I think we'd all agree that, especially when you're putting this into place with a 2-year-old, their wishes and needs are going to change quite a lot over their school career. So we're kind of the starting point, really, and it's really important to be able to revisit that whenever necessary. So can we move on again, please? Can we move on 2 slides, please? So the next slide is about the person-centred meeting. So this is something which is fundamental with doing IDPs. You need to have a person-centred meeting, but it also is important for those children that don't necessarily require an IDP, but might require a transition meeting prior to them starting in school, or a meeting to produce a 1-page profile. So they can be used for lots of different things, but the fundamentals of them are the same. So these headings here run through the whole of individual development plans and the 1-page profiles, and they are a key factor of every meeting. So you would go through who's here. Sorry, I should say we've been running these online since COVID, and they've actually worked really well online, much better than we thought they would, really. So we did used to do them in the school or in the setting, but we can do them both. We can do them both ways, and I think we get a lot more people attending when they're online. So it's kind of one of those silver linings. So it's quite amenable to both places, to both settings.
We got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
So just to run through them quick. So who's here? What we like and admire about the child. What's important too. So not what we may think is important, what we think is important, what they think is important, what we think what is important for. What's working, so what needs to be continued, what's not working, and any unresolved questions anybody has, and way forward, so an action plan. Can you move on to the next one, please? I'm going to whiz through these last few. So at the end of the meeting, it's important to ensure that everybody's had the opportunity to contribute, to make sure that everybody understands what will be done by who and when and what their role is, to agree a review date, to collate information, prepare and distribute the IDP or the 1-page profile, like I was saying, or the healthcare plan. And it's not the facilitator's job to create an IDP independently, change the wording, direct key stakeholders, or undertake agreed actions for other people. Can you move on again, please? So for those who don't have an IDP, like I was saying, there's the 1-page profile. So this gives an insight. It's the same headings that I discussed. It's much more flexible. It's much more personalised and it's a very positive document. So this would be produced with the parents and the setting, and would go either into the setting or the school prior to them starting, to give them a little overview of that child and give them an opportunity to put plans in place. Can we move on again, please? And this is just to finish off on the early years forum. So I have talked about it a little bit, but in Cardiff in the Vale, we run a weekly early years forum where we get together to discuss and decide plan for children going into school. So we support and review for children with additional needs and disabilities from birth to 5 years. We get referrals mostly in from health, but anywhere can refer. And these slides will be made available, so feel free, hopefully they'll make a bit more sense, and feel free to contact me after this if you've got any questions. And I'm so sorry that was such a whistle-stop tour. I need to take a breath. Thank you so much to everybody, and I hope that's been really useful.
Yeah, I can't see any questions in the chat bar, so I don't know whether anybody's got anything to say or ask. No.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks everybody for listening. I think we've got to go back to the main room now.